I ended up getting into some trouble, ended up getting arrested, and I had had my fair share of run-ins with police over the course of my life. And so this was not my first time dealing with this, but it was the first time that my dad had to come get me.
See Beneath Your Beautiful podcast is raw and intimate, sometimes funny, and always entertaining. With new episodes every Saturday, Hara explores our loves, fears, and hopes with a delicious combination of depth and lightness.
My name is Stevie Valles. I'm the executive director of Chicago Votes. Chicago Votes is a nonprofit in Chicago, Illinois. We're nonpartisan nonprofit, and we work to get young people more engaged and involved in the political process. We do a lot of civic education programming. We do a lot of advocacy programming, and we do a lot of leadership development programming. We have three primary initiatives that we run. Give a Shit, which, excuse my French, that's the name of the initiative. We engage creatives and young people who are kind of participating in like the creative and cultural aspects of the city of Chicago. And we work with them to develop civic programming and civic initiatives. We have the Give a Shit Collective, which is a collective of artists that kind of drives the thinking and planning around the Give a Shit program. We have a program called Shit Talks. We also have Give a Shit Happy Hours, which are kind of meetups that we host where people can come and be in community with one another. And they're always themed under like a very initiative or political issue in the city of Chicago. We also have a series called Shit Talking Central, where we have young people write blogs about the issues that matter to them locally. And that kind of is the Give a Shit department of the organization, if you will. Another initiative of ours is Unlock Civics, and that's the initiative where we work with young community members who are at the intersection of the carceral system and participating in democracy. As part of Unlock Civics, we do voting in jail. Since 2017, we've been registering voters inside the Cook County Jail. That initiative coincidentally turned into a policy campaign and launched the kind of advocacy and policy department of our organization. We were registering voters in the jail once a month, and we realized that registration is great, but like we need to make sure that these people who are incarcerated in the Cook County Jail specifically are given an opportunity to vote. So we partnered with groups like the ACLU, Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, DePaul University, the Muslim Action Network here in Chicago. And we advocated for a bill and ultimately passed a bill that turned the Cook County Jail into a polling location. It also made sure that every jail in the state of Illinois was given to people incarcerated there an opportunity to vote. It also ensured that when people were being released from prison, they were getting a Know Your Rights guide, so they knew that they had the right to vote. We have a civics in prison program where we make sure people in prison are getting access to civics courses within a year before their release date. So we also passed a bill to make sure that that was a state law. And now we're working with prisons across the state to ensure that civics courses are being taught to people in prison. A lot of people don't realize this, but in Cook County specifically, we get to elect our judges.
Okay.
And so we go and participate in court watching, gather data on judges, and we use that data as well as data from a number of other sources to develop a judicial voter guide that we distribute to voters across the city of Chicago. And that's primarily, that effort of distributing the voter guides is primarily housed in the third initiative of Chicago Votes, which is Reimagining Democracy, which was coincidentally launched from a Give a Shit happy hour.
Oh, cool.
We actually had that happy hour outside of the Cook County Jail in the park to commemorate the passage of voting in jail. Also part of Reimagining Democracy, we have an initiative called Parade to the Polls. That's an initiative where we parade youth from high schools and colleges to their nearest polling location to cast their ballot every single election.
Very cool. And
every single parade takes on a different kind of vibe or culture. We've had parades with the LGBTQIS community on the north side through Boys Town, which was a drag to the polls.
Oh, cool.
Which was a ton of fun. We had mayoral forums where we brought together 10 Chicago public schools and about 300 students, and they were able to ask questions of the mayoral candidates who were running for mayor in the 2019 election. And here in Chicago, we had about 16 people running, and we got 10 candidates to come out. 300 students got to ask them questions. And we told the candidates that they weren't allowed to argue with each other. But if a candidate was saying something that another candidate disagreed with, they could hold up emoji placards to indicate like how they felt about what another candidate was saying. And so you saw a lot of candidates put up claps for what other candidates were saying, which I thought was interesting. You hardly ever see candidates validate each other. A lot of laughing, a lot of smiling, a lot of poop emojis. We were at Malcolm X College. All the students in the auditorium were able to put up either green placards or red placards to indicate how they felt about what a candidate was saying. It was a ton of fun. Then we loaded up buses, took all the kids to go vote, gave them pizza before we went. They got to go vote for mayor based off of the candidate forum that they just watched. And then outside of the polling location, we put down a red carpet and we gave all the kids voter T-shirts that they could wear and walk down the red carpet while we have photographers outside taking pictures of them. Every year we hire a cohort of young people, high school, being released from jail, prison, in the creative scenes, formerly incarcerated. We build this cohort of like diverse youth, usually like 99% Black or brown. Mm-hmm. And we run these different programs throughout the year. We're teaching kids how to track legislation as it goes through the legislative process. Because what we've learned is like voting is one thing, but there's a lot of work that goes into advocacy as well. And the main advocacy campaign that we're working on right now is a bill that would make it legal for people to vote in prison.
So voting in jail wasn't always allowed? And I can't remember, there was a difference between jail and prison.
Yes, there's a difference between jails and prison. Jails are where people go in pretrial detention, when they're in pretrial detention and they haven't been convicted. Prison is where people go post-conviction. The law we passed, voting in jail, made it so people in jail actually had access to the ballot, and so that local county clerks and state board of elections were provided clarity around that process. Because yes, you're right. People in jail always had the right to vote. However, no jails provided polling locations.
Right.
And so we passed a law to make sure that the Cook County Jail became a polling location. And that law also made it so that every jail in the state was being asked to participate.
That's awesome.
And it clarified for the election authorities across the state and statewide that voting in jail is actually a thing that you're allowed to do. And so now we're working on voting in prison, which is the next step.
What do you think it does for somebody who's incarcerated in prison to have the right to vote?
I think voting is a human right. I think it's very humanizing for people who are incarcerated to be given the right to vote. I also feel that giving people in prison the opportunity to have a voice in government will help them develop a voice so they can actually speak up on the things that happen every day in prison that go unnoticed by lawmakers, by the media, or you only capture like a very one-sided perspective or a very narrow perspective on what the prison experience is like. I think by making sure that people in prison actually have that right, they can collectively speak to some of the commonalities in prison that need to be changed to make it a more humane existence for the people in prison. I also think that the justice system that is putting a lot of people in prison isn't working. And the stories of those who are most harmed by the justice system are the stories of those who are in prison. And the only way for them to tell that story is if they have a voice.
Right.
And so by making sure that they have a voice in government by way of their vote, is ultimately ensuring that the voices are being heard of those most harmed by a justice system that's just not functioning properly. It's very harmful to communities and it's harmful to democracy. America incarcerates more people than any country in the world, which means America disenfranchises more people than any democracy in the world. In order for America to be telling the truth, then people in prison should be able to actually participate in the democracy that America boasts of.
Yeah, I am very not knowledgeable about this, but I even have had 2 brothers incarcerated and go to prison, 2 of 3, but I never gave this a thought. So I'm so glad to be thinking about it. And so that makes me wonder, how are you funded and who is giving a shit?
So we have a very diverse funding portfolio. Part of our funding comes from foundations. Labor unions have traditionally given us funding. We also have businesses that contribute to us. Nike gives us funding. National Basketball Players Association is a funder of ours. We also have like an individual donor program. We kind of string all that together to build the nonprofit, the organization we're running.
Do you have a lot of volunteers also?
Yeah, we have a ton of volunteers, hundreds, thousands of volunteers. I've missed them because of the pandemic. I got to go to the jail yesterday for the first time in, I think like 16, 17 months. It was cool to be there with the volunteers, to hear feedback on our programs. We have old volunteers. Those are, I must admit, I don't want to say old, but we have elders. Those are my favorite. I love our elders. We have a lot of volunteers in colleges and high schools. We have a lot of creatives who volunteer with us. Unfortunately, we just lost one of our creatives yesterday to gun violence here in Chicago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have a big family here. We're doing a lot of great work. But, you know, Chicago is Chicago. It's kind of violent and rough in every city across America right now. So we're also navigating the realities of being in this country.
You just reminded me that my favorite show right now is The Chi. I really love that show.
I sat next to Lena White. Is it Lena Wyeth? She's the producer of it.
Oh, it's so good.
And she's a Black woman from Chicago. I sat next to her at the Obama summit here.
Oh, cool.
And I didn't know it was her. I was just like, she looks like Lena Wyeth. I think that was more so me giving myself an excuse to be too afraid to speak to her. But I sat next to her for an entire program and I told my friends about it and they were very upset that I didn't say hi. But yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah.
Vic Mensa, he's an actor on that show. He's a big volunteer of ours. He's a supporter of ours. He's a friend.
Oh, cool. It's a great show.
Yeah, and it's cool because, you know, people from Chicago are very involved and like in that show. So yeah, it's pretty neat.
The reason I thought of it when you said Chicago is Chicago. Well, I haven't actually been to Chicago, but now I feel like I have. I feel like I have an in. I've been into some neighborhoods.
Chicago's very popularized around the country. You know, you got Chicago PD, Chicago Fire, you have the Chi, Chicago Indie, and it's telling like a very similar narrative about the city. It captures like some true stories, but you know, there's a lot of rich and like cool and unique cultural aspects of Chicago and a lot of joy in Chicago that I think sometimes isn't always captured. But, you know, I like the Chi because it goes back and forth, right? Like you see,
it does. Yeah.
You see that joy, you see that beauty, you see how fun it is. But then you see the other side of it, like what happened to our young creative this past week.
Yeah.
You can't deny that that is part of living here.
They beautifully tell stories. That's what I like about the show. The grittiness, but also the beauty of what a life is.
Yeah.
My goal with this podcast is to kind of offer people hope. And, you know, I really like an overcomer story. And when I was doing some research on you, I found the last time you were arrested was at 22 and your dad was a pastor. And would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, I do want to just preface it by saying that, you know, I'm blessed to have never actually experienced what it's like to go to prison, which is that next phase after pretrial incarceration. I experienced pretrial incarceration for a very small period of time, but it was very eye-opening for me. I had graduated from college. I had moved back home to Elyria, Ohio. I was struggling to find work. I was kind of lost in the world, very scattered, very scared, very confused, trying to figure out my way. Because up until that point, I had had an educational institution that I was a part of. Mm-hmm. I had friends that were always with me, and I had a role that I always had to play. Mm-hmm. But then when I was kind of like cast into the world, I was like, whoa, I'm all over the place now. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up getting into some trouble, ended up getting arrested. And I had had my fair share of run-ins with police over the course of my life. So this was not my first time dealing with this, but it was the first time that my dad had to come get me. Mm. Every other time I was able to actually get out without my father ever finding out. There's something about seeing like a loved one or someone who loves and cares about you be heartbroken or fearful of the road that you're heading down that kind of forces you to look inside yourself and be like, okay, there's some things I should probably change. I think there are ways in which I can probably course correct in some way. That's ultimately what I landed on. Is like, I want to try to figure it out. I don't quite know how I'm going to figure it out, but I'm going to try to like work hard and figure it out. You know, that experience catapulted me. It wasn't directly to politics. However, the job that I was able to secure that allowed for me to move away from where I grew up, which is a very important part of me trying to like make it. The job that got me out of my hometown was a political one. But once I got that job and I had an opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. as a result of that job, I ended up getting like 4 or 5 other jobs. Part of it was because I needed to, you know, make a living. But a lot of it had to do with me still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. You know what I mean? I cared about politics. I was interested in policy. I got a social work degree in college, and I was very interested in trying to help people. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite classes in college was a policy course where I saw the correlation between what government was doing and the livelihood of humans that I wanted to see survive. I was working at a think tank going down that policy route, but I also was working at a club where I was a bouncer. I was also teaching social studies and Bible classes as a substitute teacher at Tacoma Academy in Maryland, Tacoma Park, Maryland. I also at one point ran a science camp, and I also worked the front desk at a gym. And so I was interested in all of those things, you know, and I spent about 2 years in Washington, D.C. I went and worked on a campaign. I came back to D.C. and then I worked on the Hill, and I was still doing all of those jobs. But eventually I kept going down the course of politics and policy, and that being the means by which I really felt my passion awaken. And now, you know, 10 years down the line, I'm 32 now. Mm-hmm. So it's been 10 years since I experienced that brief snippet of incarceration. Mm-hmm. I can honestly say that like I'm enjoying the work that I'm doing. And I feel like I did overcome pretty significant barriers prior to that final incarceration and even after. And I still have to overcome barriers every day. I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned in this role. No matter how far you go, there's still going to be challenges along the way. But I do draw on the reality that I was able to overcome everything I overcame in the past to kind of give myself the confidence I need to overcome the things that I feel like I can overcome moment to moment.
Are you talking about like racial barriers?
Yeah, race is a significant one. Yeah, race, I think, is one of the biggest barriers that I struggle with personally. Mm-hmm. I remember last year during the pandemic, after George Floyd died, and I've gone through stuff like this my whole life. You know, I remember the first time I experienced a Black kid being shot and killed by the police and a city going into uprising was when I was 11. And Timothy Thomas was shot by the Cincinnati police. He had a misdemeanor and he was running. He went to pull up his pants. They found no weapon on him and they killed him. And the whole city blew up. Ever since I was a kid, I've had negative interactions with the police. I've choked by cops. I've been arrested before. I've been cuffed and put into back of cars for the sole purpose of intimidation.
Yeah.
And then there's all of the other, microcosms that you see in society in America, the things that people say, the images that are portrayed on television, the way people look at you when you're walking down the street, the way you have to show up in board meetings, the way you have to conduct yourself in traditional rooms, like predominantly white dominated or male dominated rooms, and having to not constantly deal with that internal dialogue. It's a lot of weight to carry day in and day out. Only recently I've realized that like that internal dialogue, to not have that internal dialogue is like a privilege and a main source of what it means to be white privileged in a like white American privileged society. It's difficult, it's difficult to feel patriotism in any way. It's difficult to swallow your tongue. I have a tendency to say things that out of rage and anger because I feel racially triggered.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like I was saying earlier, around having to overcome stuff and in order to be able to overcome more, I definitely feel like that is like part of the strength of being a Black American is that I'm thankful for. I don't fear much. I understand how bad things could be. And so I just, again, do draw optimism from the reality that, because I have to overcome this, because my ancestors had to overcome this, because my peers have to overcome this, all because we have melanin.
Right.
I feel like myself, my ancestor, and my peers are all the more stronger. And the more cultural acknowledgement, just a better society, the more that we strive to make life better for ourselves, the better off life is for everybody. You know what I mean? We are a part of a demographic that experiences extreme oppression. And I don't even experience it the worst. I want to acknowledge that. You know what I mean? I'm a straight male,
right?
But I am Black. But for the intersection of being a woman, being a member of the LGBTQIA community, for being poor, for being disabled, there are a lot of people who have to deal with way more than I have to deal with. And I want to acknowledge that I do believe that, on the racial component, that is something that I personally experience and something that I do share with a large community that I feel is very strong.
I love that you're in the position you're in, though, because hopefully you can make change in that area. I don't know. I want to say that, we're evolving, but I live in Idaho and I know better.
I love Idaho, by the way.
It's beautiful.
I go to Sandpoint, Idaho every year. Yeah, Idaho is beautiful.
It's very beautiful, but I can't believe the people that live here. I'm from Miami originally.
Wow. So, yeah.
So I'm just like, anyway, it's just very, very.
I think society's evolving. I think society has evolved. But, evolution isn't always good. Evolution also means like oppression can also evolve and become more sophisticated and different in its texture.
Explain what you mean.
My grandma grew up in a society, she's from the South, where she could not drink from water fountains that didn't say coloreds only on it. That's terrible.
Brings tear to my eyes.
Yeah, when you think about that now, it's like that's unspeakable. That would never happen.
Right.
And moving away from that kind of demeaning, public-facing, embarrassing behavior that is so explicit, I don't think it is that explicit anymore. However, I do believe there are still prevailing narratives in public media. I do believe that there are still policies and laws that are passed that are racially discriminative.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not as explicit as saying like Black people can't do this. It's don't give people water when they're in line to vote in Georgia.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it's a predominantly Black population. where Black people are voting and Georgia is going blue for the president and for the Senate. Like,
yeah.
Then all of a sudden you see a state like Georgia pass a law like that. And then you see places like Texas who want to pass a similar law. It makes me think that's exactly how Jim Crow started. During the Reconstruction era, right after slavery, tons of Black people were voting. Tons of Black people were getting elected to public office. We have Black governors, Black senators, Black congressmen, Black Wall Street, all during this era and time. And then one state passed these Jim Crow laws that were racially discriminatory against Black people. And then Georgia saw South Carolina pass those laws, so Georgia passed similar laws. Then Texas did the same thing. Then Mississippi did the same thing. And I'm not sure if that's the order, but that's kind of the domino effect.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that the same attack on voting rights occurring, the same region of the country, as a result of the same thing, which is Black people turning out and voting at high levels. But it's being done boldly. There's a lot of money going towards it, and it's being denied that is racism.
Right.
In prison, there were more Black people in prison than in some years during slavery recently, in like 2014, which means that there were more Black people disenfranchised from voting in America in 2014 than there were in some years in the 1700s when chattel slavery was legal.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery doesn't exist, but the same sort of disenfranchisement does.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I mean by evolution. It's like there's still these remnants of the past that currently exist, but they don't look the same. The texture of it is a little different. The words to describe it are a little different. And that's why there's such a large debate, And only the future will tell how people look at this era and issues such as these. But for right now, we're living in a lot of oppression beyond prisons and voting rights that are not too dissimilar to the 60s, the 50s, and there's some eras where Black people had it really rough in the country.
My 22-year-old gives me hope because she's so evolved. Like, she's so inclusive with everything and wants to change the world. I just think that the younger people really might change the world. I don't know. I hope so.
I agree. That's why I love my job, because I am optimistic round the clock because I'm surrounded by that.
Yeah.
I'm 32. So at this point, I'm realizing that the best thing for me to do in terms of my civic involvement, civic engagement, and political advocacy is to look and listen to the people who are your daughter's age.
Right.
And to be very mindful of my speech, to really take into account the privileges that I have, the oppression that I feel, really to be introspective about the work that I'm doing and to be selfless about it and to ultimately understand that what we're doing here is trying to make life better for people other than ourselves. The only way that it'll get better is to advocate for each other, to collectively move things.
There's hope. There's real hope.
That's why Chicago Votes is fun, because a lot of what we're building is avenues for people to get involved, to learn how our systems are constructed in society and to really see the issues that they want to sink their teeth into and be creative about the way that they want to go about addressing it.
Right.
And it's tons of fun because it's all young people. It's all idealistic.
Yes, very.
So there isn't this idea of this can't be done. It's what new can we try?
Yeah. Is your dad still alive?
Yes, my dad is still alive. He was just here visiting me.
Oh, he was. That's awesome. How does he feel about you changing the world? Because I think you are also.
He definitely feels that way. My dad is very encouraging, makes sure that I know all the time how proud he is of me and of the work that I'm doing. My dad's a very happy person, a loving person. And he honestly, he feels the way he feels about me, about everyone, which is beautiful. I've had to grow to really appreciate that. You know what I mean? And I do really appreciate it. It's important that your loved ones are proud of you. It feels good to be making somebody proud.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. I really appreciate you sharing your story with me and how you've come so far. And I'm excited for your future and what's to come.
Thank you. I appreciate you interviewing me. This was fun. This was really nice to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. You can stay excited. I'll try not to be afraid.
I'm Jewish, and I remember when I moved from Miami to Tampa, I was like the first Jewish person anybody had ever seen, and they were afraid of me. So, I feel like I have a little tiny glimpse into what it's like to not be liked for something you can't change or help, or what difference does it make?
Right. More importantly, it's great to be Jewish. It's great to be Black.
Like, you don't like me for my ancestry, I guess is what it is what you're saying.
Right.
So anyway, I just feel a little bit like I understand just a tiny, tiny bit. Obviously, I don't understand, but.
Oh, yeah. It's like othering people in general. It's a terrible trait.
Yeah, that's it.
That we have to kind of get out of society. Like, we got to root it out.
Right.
Just let everybody be what they are and who they are and what they choose to be, and mind your own business and love them for it, in fact.
Right.
Construct society to make them more comfortable. Like, why not?
Until we love ourselves for exactly who we are, there's no way we can love others. And I think that's the key.
Yep. I agree.
Well, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.